Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Teens for Business. Today, we have an incredibly special episode commemorating 50 episodes of this podcast. As always, we're so happy to have you here and join us on our journey. My name is Jackie.
I'm Kywin.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Ivan.
We'll be taking you along on a ride through the past few years, some of our favorite episodes, special moments, and what we've taken away from this experience as a whole. So, a few things we want to touch upon. I can start off. This is one question I really want to know personally. What has been your favorite episode that we've done so far?
I think I'll start
Go
on
ahead.
this. I may be a little biased, but my favorite episode was the episode on the Las Vegas Strip where we talked about, the business models of the very few large hotels on the strip and the casinos to, make the most money.
Honestly, that LB, I mean, in my personal experience, definitely reviewing LBW was definitely one of my favorite episodes. The Las Vegas episode was, in my opinion, very fun to research, and like watching that Vox video to prepare for that, it was like really nice and just see the competitive environment in Las Vegas. And also like making the thumbnail for that episode was really fun because I got to like find all the colorful aspects of it, kind of like revamp my thumbnail, make the text flash a little bit more. So it's definitely fun doing the Las Vegas episode. And then I also like doing the NVIDIA episode because that's a really hot topic right now. And I thought it was very engaging and there's a lot to talk about for that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's definitely a lot of fun episodes that we've done, but I think some episodes that I just like really stood out to me were ones that we kind of brought people onto our show and kind of interviewed guest speakers. For example, like talking to Dr. Joy Zhang about engineering and like the intersection of AI and business, and even how he, like an industry professional of 20, 30 plus years, felt like it challenged what he has learned in his entire career when he first tried Chat GPT. Just goes to show like how there's so much growth in this field of business, in the field of AI, and like how there's so much to learn from just talking to guest speakers in general. So I just thought that was a really great experience.
Yeah, 100%. I think I have a few that really stick out to me and I really like. Number one, I think I would have to go with the interview with Professor Tyler Rye from Wharton. I think it was really, really interesting to learn from him. Just like hear his general thoughts, especially since like Teens for Business and like what he talked about really, really intertwined with that as a whole. So I really loved hearing that and like talking with him, just that whole experience as a whole. And then I think also the ones with like LBW. So I went to MTSI obviously, but for LBW, I really like, enjoyed hearing like Ivan and Jack's experiences. I thought that was incredibly fun to hear like what other programs at that same place I went to were like. Even though like it was a different programs, enjoyed hearing that. And then when a few of the LBW friends came on to some of, I think it was the one about clubs that we do. It was really, really interesting meeting those people. So I think those two were definitely the ones that stuck out to me most. Um, and then moving on, so let's reflect on how far we've come. So like we just named a bunch of episodes we really liked. And some were like kind of in the past, some were relatively more recent. But what are some changes or improvements that you think that we've made over the course of 50 episodes? Because that was a long time ago, relatively, and we definitely have made some significant changes.
Yeah, I think we have made a lot of changes actually. Like having like before we never even had cameras turned on, but now we do, and I think that's a really good change. But I think the best change we probably made was the thumbnails because we used to only have one thumbnail for Spotify and that's it. And then for when we started having the YouTube channel, then kept on using the same thumbnail. But I think Jack really pulled through here, and then I think his thumbnails are really encompassing of the topics we're discussing, and and his thumbnails are adapted to like the YouTube, to Instagram, and even to Spotify. And I think that's a very big improvement for our podcast.
Yeah, just to touch on that, I have had a really fun experience making those thumbnails, especially when I started off. Like I was like using Canva to like animate and make new like color schemes for each episode. I started off by making templates, but I think it was at the Las Vegas episode that I decided to just start using photo backgrounds, and that was especially fun to like find photos online and take those photos and add it to the template. Also, on Instagram, you could see that I eventually found a way to animate these images, make them more flashy, turn them into Instagram reels. That's definitely one of the success and very flashy. And also before like I even talked about like making like YouTube thumbnails, like I was before that I was making the same thumbnails for Instagram, Spotify, but now I start and YouTube, but then I started making like different like wider YouTube thumbnails. That was also really fun to make. And then just and then some other improvements that I'd like to touch on. First of all, my microphone did improve. So I started off pretty rough and then it got better. So that's definitely a highlight. And then we also did started doing part ones and part twos on different topics. And that was really nice because we got to dive deep into different topics or related topics into like connected episodes. And they were also like somewhat shorter. So I guess the audience could be a little bit thankful for that. And then, yeah, those are some big changes that we made that I felt like were pretty good.
And yeah, I think that we've definitely come a long way, especially from the beginning, like our first couple of episodes. I think overall, just like even getting more comfortable talking on camera, just like starting a podcast, that's even like taking a big first step. And like Ivan and Jack have mentioned, like our marketing are like building off what we've done by adding Instagram Reels, adding YouTube Shorts, animations with the thumbnails that Jack has created. The thumbnails have definitely gotten a lot better. I really like our thumbnails right now. You guys can take a look, just scroll through our YouTube or scroll through our Spotify. You can take a look at how they've kind of progressed. And then also, yeah, like breaking our episodes into parts, I think that's a big thing. I just think that it gives us more space to kind of talk about the topics that we're presenting and kind of break things down individually. And yeah, it helps our audience. I think it helps you guys stay focused on what we're talking about, so it's just not a long episode of a bunch of different topics. I think that, yeah, we've definitely come a long way from the beginning, and I'm excited for future episodes as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of the technical aspects, like the technical changes that we've made, including marketing, including just the way we make our videos look as a whole. But I think for me, the two biggest things are one, what Kyvan mentioned about like how comfortable we are with talking on camera and just the ability to speak, I guess. And then number two is also the way we kind of improved the video quality, and not like saying like the way we look per se, but the way like we have our things all framed together. So if you look at the beginning, we just didn't have any cameras at all. So that's not really video quality. But then like once we started having video on, there was like sometimes in the middle of episodes where the cameras would just glitch out. That'd be a little weird. Or sometimes like we would have just different backgrounds. Some people would have like backgrounds, some people wouldn't have their things blurred, and like just it wasn't cohesive. And then I think one of the episodes we just made that change where it became so much more cohesive. Everyone was all blurred, so like it looked similar. And then obviously this episode is a special thing, so the different backgrounds celebrating our 50th anniversary. But yeah, and then going back to the first point about talking, I think at the very beginning we would be very like reliant on something we would have beforehand. So I think like our scripts, things like that, that was very much like what we relied on, like the backbone of it. But I think we've all gotten a lot more comfortable just saying whatever we think of in the moment and not necessarily needing a set out script with like, okay, I'm going to say exactly these 10 words right now. So I think that's definitely one thing. Oh, and another thing is I think the topic of our episodes, at the beginning they were very much like they were pretty broad, but they were all like based on our own personal experiences, which makes sense. But then like recently we've gotten more into like the news and into more like current events or things that are actually happening in the world. And I think that's really, really great, especially like as a listener to hear like this different perspective or like this range of perspectives. So those three things definitely would be like my favorite part. Um, and then another thing is, what do you guys think we've talked about the most in the podcast? Just like curiosity, like what have we focused on?
Yeah, I think in definitely in the recent few episodes, I think we have kind of just like Jackie said, transitioned towards kind of recent events, and I think that's what we've been recently been doing. And I think what we've been doing a lot is talking about the recent events. It's like not just recent events, it's talking about the recent events that people usually just know, oh, this happened, and then they don't really think much about it any other way. But we actually like go in and we dig deeper and we talk about all the aspects, both sides, if there are sides, and talk about like the since we're about a business podcast, we talk about the business, and I think that's a very special thing and unique thing we do is just digging deep and finding where business applies to these events and how our audience can relate to that.
Yeah, that's definitely been a main theme of this podcast, and that's definitely an aspect that I've very much enjoyed. I feel like we did talk, I feel like some of the the topics that we talked about most, one of the topics we talked about most was Twitter, and I think we made three or four episodes on this topic, and that's definitely it's been very exciting to track Twitter's like progression since Elon Musk took over, and now their progression since then. And another thing we've like always like talked about in how I felt is like tech and business like connections, especially within like AI. And like we recently discussed the news of Nvidia and its like market dominance and how just the semiconductor industry. But we also had Joy Zhang come onto our podcast to discuss like the intersections of AI and business. And I think before that we also did a ChatGPT episode pretty early on. So that's definitely a main topic we talked about. But definitely I've observed that when we started, we were trying to like focus on like more general topics, more relatable topics that can definitely like help us like set a little bit of a baseline for us. Like at the beginning, we actually had like a little bit of a schedule to talk about which topics we were talking about, but later it just became that we just like obviously like just said it like based on like what was being said. And definitely once that started happening, we could start focusing on diving in depth to like the more recent news, talking a lot about that, giving different perspectives. I thought that was definitely very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think that in the beginning, especially, we were kind of focusing on like in terms of what Teens for Business was, we were setting that like explaining how like business concepts essentially, but we weren't diving really into like current events and whatnot. And I think we were able to progress our channel into just like more of like going with the flow where we didn't really have a set like planned block for every single week, but we would kind of see what's going on and we would basically type up scripts for that. And yeah, I think a couple of topics that we really dived into recently, like semiconductors, mergers and acquisitions, like Jack mentioned, Twitter. I think we had a fascination with Elon Musk and what he's been able to do with Twitter. And also like in the beginning, I've noticed like a bunch of sports episodes as well, like the Super Bowl and things like that. I think overall we've been able to cover a pretty diverse amount of topics. I don't think we've really specialized in anything specifically, but there were a couple episodes that we maybe like dived into a couple of things deeper just because we thought they were a little bit more important or we didn't cover enough and there was more information to talk about. And I just think that, but like overall, I think we definitely are able to cover a lot of topics with our podcast, and I think that's very good.
Yeah, just to add on to that, like not only do we like give like podcast episodes about like, just content, we also like especially with our LBW and MNTSI episodes, we definitely like we're definitely showed like that our relation aspect to it and how we were supposed like how we wanted to like spread the information potentially about LBW and MNTSI with our own experiences, and also the high school business clubs. That was mostly also an episode about like our individual experiences on the high school level and the teenage level. So definitely we've also had that also like contributes to the wide diversity of episodes that we are putting out today.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think if we look at the timeline of the podcast, you get like very at the beginning, it's very much like focused on the things we've done and sharing those things. So I remember at the very beginning, one of our episodes was focusing on jobs that we've had or like internships, things like that. So obviously it's talking about our own experiences and the things that we've seen around us. And I think that like in itself should be pretty relatable. Like the things we've done, the things that we've seen people done, like it's all like on a more like personal scale to relate to us. And then I think as we progressed a little bit, it started becoming more like, oh, like what do you see in the Super Bowl? What do you see in the NBA? What do you see in Vegas casinos? Like things like that. And then it was all a little bit more about a specific field. And then now we've gotten into a little bit more like problems in the business world. So like looking at things like strikes, looking at kind of like the podcast about like chips and like the international relations between the US, China, and like Taiwan, things like that. So it's a little bit more on the more critical thinking side of things, if you think of it that way. And so I think like that shift in timeline is definitely something very interesting. And I'm really excited actually to see like where we go next, because I don't think we'll be focusing on problems like forever more. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see like what we naturally kind of dive into. Because like when we made those changes, it wasn't like we sat down and we were like, okay guys, we're going to start talking about this set of topics now. Like it just kind of like became a thing and just like a trend. So I think that definitely is something really interesting. And then on the timeline, so what advice would you give to yourself when we made our first episode, or like first few episodes?
Yeah, and advice I would give myself is definitely, to dig deeper into these topics. Because in the beginning few episodes, I think we really were focused on like the general broad perception and the general economic application to like culture or like the Super Bowl. But I think as the more recent episodes came in, collectively as a podcast, we realized there's a lot to dig, there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to apply our knowledge to in these recent events and events in general. And I think a very good advice for a first episode me is to like dig deeper, maybe definitely the demand that people coming to the Super Bowl will bring an economic boost to the locals, but in what ways, how specifically. So I think that's a very important part, just digging deeper until you actually can't dig any further.
Yeah, that's definitely something I would also translate to myself, my first like episode self. And also I'd like to talk about maybe another suggestion, probably from a different perspective, is like to persevere when making this podcast. Like I've seen a lot of like friends. I've had two friends who have both made their like both like made their podcast like during the time that we made our podcast, but during AP season, like their podcast like kind of like they just like stopped making episodes. And also according to a statistic, on average YouTube podcast channels last for approximately 14 episodes, and I feel like it has been pretty impressive that we were able to last for 50. So definitely advice I would give to myself is to like persevere, keep like making these episodes, because it'll give you a lot of like value. For me, it has given so many like experiences of like not only just like researching business connections to like strengthen like my business connections, strengthen my business interests, but it's also allowed me to like get more in touch with with like today's news and like in a way teenage trends.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that as well. But I think that the main thing I would probably tell myself is just kind of like from the beginning, just like be a little bit more confident and know that making a podcast is a learning process and not expecting everything to be perfect from the start, but like being patient and like focusing on continuous improvement with each episode, with everything that we're doing. I think we've done a pretty good job of that. But just like like making a business is definitely, there's going to be bumps in the road. I think that this podcast venture is essentially like we're creating something from scratch. We're starting like a podcast just from when we started, we basically started from scratch. And just like, yeah, knowing that this is a learning process is the main thing, and kind of like taking it, like taking it slow. I think we did a pretty good job of that, but like even being more so like confident in our journey and like confident in our own ability to be able to get there in the end. And also like this is more a technical thing, but basically investing in a bit higher quality equipment from the start, like higher quality microphones and cameras would just make the whole process a little bit smoother from the beginning. But yeah, I think we've done a pretty good job to be able to get here to 50 episodes. And yeah, I can't wait to see how many more we're going to be able to film.
um Yeah, I definitely agree. It's just like the last part Kyron said about like how many more we'll be able to film. That just made me laugh a little bit. Um, but I think for me personally, some advice I would give myself is just knowing that like however well you do on that first episode, like you can be like incredible on that first episode, but if that's your baseline, you're still going to improve, right? Like you're still going to make changes, you're still going to um do things like tweak some things to make it even better. So I think like it's not so much like don't focus on the perfection of that first episode, because whatever doing, like you're not going to make that complacent, right? Like you're always going to be like, okay, well, so maybe I can make this thing a little bit better, or like I can try this out. So I think that definitely is something to be like looked at. Like you're not going to make a perfect first episode, so don't worry about it, because no matter how perfect you think that first episode is, when you look back, you're going to be like, oh, okay, well, that wasn't so perfect as I thought it was, like, or anything like that, because you're always going to be making changes and tweaks to it. And I think another thing to look at is like not being afraid to like make changes to something that's set in stone. Like this isn't really necessarily applying to the first episode per se, but more of like the first 10, the first 20, or like just the process as a whole. And I'm sure like this, whenever like we're into like our 100th episode, we'll look back on this and we'll be like, okay, well, I would definitely not do that, or like I would definitely not do this. And so I think like making changes shouldn't be something we're afraid to do, especially like if it doesn't work, then okay, we'll just go back to your original like style or like whatever you had. But like if you like the change, then like obviously continue with it. And so I think not being afraid to make changes, or like at least try out a new format, is definitely something to take note of. Like for example, the cameras, like that was something we debated a long time, and then we were like, okay, well, let's just try it. And then I think like somewhere in the midst you can still like see, like sometimes we'd have the cameras on, sometimes it would be off, but like you can kind of see that progression, which I think is really interesting to see, like how we've done things throughout the 50 episodes. And then also like the 2-part things, like sometimes at the very beginning, like we didn't have any 2 parts. Like, okay, well, 45 minutes, boom, done. Okay, like next week. And then we started having like the integration of 2 parts. And so I think like definitely not being afraid to make changes is something to take note of, because sometimes those changes can actually be very, very beneficial. You just never know until you actually try them. And speaking of changes, but not necessarily changes, just things moving forward, what are you looking forward to for our podcast, or just this, like Kyron called it, enterprise business as a whole? Like what are some things you think we can improve on? What are some things you think we will do better? Just general things like that.
Yeah, and I know we've been improving on this for quite a long time, like, but I'm definitely looking forward to increasing our social media presence. And we've been from zero, only uploading on Spotify, to some, to like starting an Instagram, to starting a YouTube channel, and then now we're doing weekly updates on the podcast. And with the Jack's creative animated thumbnails, I think that's been generating quite a few views. And I think if we continue on, put some more effort into the social media, definitely we can see a really great boost in people watching the podcast. And as a general, like, we can see the improvement from basically zero to a lot of social media influence, which is something I quite look forward to.
Yeah, definitely. Just to add on to that, like we could put, I could potentially envision us like potentially making a website to like consolidate all our platforms. Like I already have a little bit of a work in progress website on Wix, but that obviously needs a lot of work right now. So, and then another thing I'm looking forward to is definitely potentially within the next 50 episodes, a lot more opportunities for guest speakers to come on. Like when we started, we were like unsure about it. We were just like a young podcast, and then we invited Dr. Michelle Ryder on, and that really spurred like the start of like getting a special guest onto our podcast, which later we invited Joy Zhang, we invited Professor Tyler Ryan, and then I invited my friend Nikhil Parita from LBW, and I'm definitely looking forward to see these different perspectives in our future episodes.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to touch on what Jack said about like getting more people onto our podcast, just basically share a variety of perspectives that maybe we don't have like currently with just us four. But I think that overall, I think I'm definitely looking forward to continuing to make episodes, of course. And obviously we want to improve our reach to be able to reach more people. And I think that starts with our social media presence. Like Ivan said, I think we're going to be able to continue to grow and then hopefully reach more high school students or even middle school students who are interested in business and want to follow our podcast and what we're talking about. But I think that by growing our reach, I think that basically we want to hit more people, whether that be like they're inspired or or they're just interested in what we're saying. But we're what we want to do is also take suggestions from our viewers. If you guys have any, like, we want to know what you guys want to see from us in the future as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Kylan's last point of like listening to what our viewers want, and then we can like go off from that. But for me personally, a few things I'm really looking forward to. Number one, this is actually like, it's gonna sound kind of silly, but basically, I run like kind of our Instagram sites, or like Jack has like the animated videos, and then I post them online and I kind of manage it from there. Um, but one of my favorite things about like posting them per se is like writing the captions and then also like choosing music choice. And like sometimes like they probably just say like random music choices, but I have so much fun like having little like cheeky like um just like things like if it's like so okay, so we like for last episode we did the strikes, right? So like I chose this song that was about like it was one of Drake's songs, and it was about like kind of like leaving or like a breakup of a relationship, because I thought it was like kind of funny, like like a strike and then a company. So I have a lot of fun choosing a song. Like it kind of sometimes doesn't make sense, but like there is some connection. So I really like doing that. And then another thing that we all mentioned was like guest speakers, and I think we have another episode coming out really really soon with Jeff Grimes, who is the founder of Shades, and he kind of talked to us a little bit about what it's like having your own business, and what it's like being a product manager at Google, just like his career as a whole, and then also going to MNT for college, just like his experience, life per se. And I think like having those perspectives is very very interesting. And then if we look at like kind of the collection of guest speakers we've had, so like some like Jeff Grimes, like he talks a little bit about all of his experiences. We look at people like I guess Dr. Michelle Ryder, like she talks about her experience as well, and the things she's learned, like about leadership in her business and her company. And then we have other speakers that are a little bit more on the technical aspect of things, like they tell us insights into the industry. Like Dr. Joy Zhang, he was very much focused on like the progression of technology since he kind of got started in the industry. And then Jack's friend Nikhil, I guess like also very personal experience, but he also did share a lot about like the tips he's learned, the things he's gathered from doing his activities. And I think like that range is definitely something I look forward in continuing. So like not just sticking with the old view, but also like getting new perspectives definitely is something. Okay, and then last question. I think this is one that's actually really important. So what have we learned non-academically? So like things like, oh, I learned that there is a strike in this industry, like that doesn't really count, but like what are some of the things we've learned personally about ourselves or about like this journey that you think are really really important?
Yeah, I think something that I gained and learned from doing this podcast is expressing my thoughts clearly. Like before, I never really had a motivation or incentive to as like a source of presentation to express my thoughts. But when this podcast came, I suddenly had to learn how to write down my thoughts first and then express that clearly in a way that other people could understand and not just me. And I think that has greatly improved through the podcast. And even though it can still improve, but I think I've come a long way, learning how to express thoughts clearly, which is definitely an important skill that is used in the business fields.
Yeah, for me, I also have a similar takeaway, and I from this episode as Ivan, and then also another thing I also definitely think I've come a long way as is public speaking, because this podcast definitely gave me like an opportunity to do public speaking, express my thoughts every week, and that's not something you normally do in every like school. And in school, like sometimes you do like presentations that are like a month and a half apart, but this podcast has given me a lot of opportunities to express myself within like a week apart from each other. So I definitely think my public speaking has gotten better.
Yeah, I think we've learned how to make a successful podcast now. But in all seriousness, I think that we've grown tremendously, like not only as a podcast, but also like just as a team of 4 people. I think we've basically spent every weekend for the past, what was the past year, is like 50 episodes, almost a year, that like preparing for and recording these podcasts. And over time, I think we've built this like very strong foundation where like it almost like works seamlessly now, where like it doesn't take much time to just like be able to hop on camera and record an episode. Of course we spend time preparing for it, but it's not as dramatic as it was maybe like when we first started out and we needed to like plan everything out. I think we've just learned how to better work with one another. And I think that's a large part of business in general. I think that this in itself is a venture, and I think we all like started doing this not knowing what to expect, but we've been able to make it like this far already. And yeah, I can't wait to see what the future holds for us.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. I think one of the I guess, academic things I've learned from this Change for Business is learning to like, actually a few things. So I touched upon this before, but like being able to make changes and like actually implement those changes, like try it out. So I think that definitely is one like that just like teaches you like, hey, like first thing you're making, like it's not actually going to be like the way it is. Like you can make your decisions, but just know like it's probably not going to actually like stand, because you're going to be like, oh, this way is actually better, and like that's just kind of the normal way. Like, you can be the smartest person in the world, you can have like the best ideas for a first episode, but like when the time like you get to like even by episode 20, like you're going to make better changes. So I think that definitely is one. And then I think another thing I've personally really learned about and really enjoyed actually learning is like the kind of different fields of business. And like that's not saying like I learned a lot of like the actual news, because like obviously I did, but I'm more so talking about like just the range of business and like everything it encompasses, and enjoying to learn like business isn't just like, okay, well I have this $5 basketball, like can you sell it? Like it's not just that, it's like super wide thing. And there's a lot of different aspects in it, and a lot of different skills, a lot of different parts of it that are incredibly fascinating. There's so many intersections. Like for example, like when Dr. Joy Zhang came to talk to us, he was talking about business and technology, obviously. And then when Dr. Michelle Ryder came to talk to us, it was like business, leadership, mental health initiatives, things like that. So, and then there's obviously like business culture. There's a lot about like business in the music industry, business in like the movie industry, like things like that, and like strikes as a whole. There's so much to learn about, and I think that also kind of goes to show like you can be an absolute expert. Like obviously I wouldn't say that we're experts per se in business, but even if you are an expert, there's always so much more to learn about. And I think like that's something that we've really kind of grown on. Like at the beginning it was very much like, okay, personal experience with business, yay, and then we moved on to like the other bigger broader parts, and there's like so many new topics that we can explore. So really, really excited to look at the topics that we explore coming in the future. Okay, yeah. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. We're absolutely thrilled that you've stuck around for 50 episodes, and we're all hoping that you'll be here for the next 50.